On the set of The Godfather, Francis Ford Coppola picked up a stray cat and handed it to Marlon Brando. He didn't plan for it to become part of the scene, it just felt right. But when the camera started rolling, the cat curled up in Brando's lap and started purring. And just like that, Don Corleone's quiet menace had an extra layer of depth. There are few directors whose careers feel as grand, chaotic, and mythic as the films they make. Francis Ford Coppola is one of them. His story is one of towering success, financial ruin, and relentless artistic reinvention. But before we break it down, if you love deep dives into cinema's greatest auteurs, a real quick ask that if you're new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, take a second to hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss these cinematic deep dives. Act 1. The Godfather Trilogy.
Then I'll kill them both.
Look how they mask. There's my book.
Okay, my father's way of doing things is old. It's finished.
You lousy bastard! You killed my husband!
If Francis Ford Coppola had retired after making The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, his place among the world's greatest filmmakers would still be pretty much unquestionable. The Godfather wasn't just a hit, it redefined the gangster genre, elevating pulp crime fiction into mythical American storytelling. Coppola fought tooth and nail to protect his vision, clashing with Paramount executives who initially saw him as too inexperienced and resisting his insistence on casting Marlon Brando and Al Pacino. But Coppola's instincts were dead on. The film became a box office sensation, won Best Picture, and established Coppola as a force in Hollywood. Then came The Godfather Part 2, a sequel that defied the usual Hollywood pattern. Instead of a mere continuation, Coppola expanded the story into a sprawling, deeply introspective tragedy. By interweaving Michael Corleone's moral disintegration with the rise of his father, Vito, Part 2 became something greater than its predecessor, an operatic meditation on power, corruption, and destiny. Al Pacino's performance as Michael transformed him from a reluctant heir into a ruthless, hollowed-out tyrant, culminating in one of cinema's most chilling endings. The film didn't just win Best Picture, it became the gold standard for sequels, proving that a follow-up could be as ambitious and profound as the original. But then came The Godfather Part 3, a film that, despite Coppola's best intentions, never reached the same heights. Unlike the first two, Part 3 felt like a compromise, more of an obligation than a passion project. Michael Corleone, now aged and regretful, was an intriguing concept on paper, but the film's execution felt strained. The absence of Robert Duvall, who declined to return over salary disputes, left a noticeable void, and Sofia Coppola's casting as Michael's daughter became a focal point for criticism. Yet, despite its flaws, The Godfather Trilogy remains the backbone of Coppola's legacy, an operatic, deeply personal saga that elevated the gangster genre to cinematic artistry. Act 2. Apocalypse Now. Descent into Madness. If The Godfather made Coppola Hollywood royalty, Apocalypse Now nearly destroyed him.
I was going to the worst place in the world and I didn't even know it yet.
I watched you change.
I wanted a mission. And for my sins, they gave me one.
What was originally envisioned as a standard war film turned into one of the most grueling, chaotic, and infamous productions in cinema history, one that blurred the line between artistic obsession and outright insanity. The film was an adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, transposed from the 19th century Africa to the Vietnam War, with Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen, sent on a mission to assassinate the rogue Colonel Kurtz, Marlon Brando. But what started as a war movie quickly became something far more unhinged, a hallucinatory existential journey into the darkest corners of human nature. And the making of the film was almost as nightmarish as the story itself. Coppola chose to shoot in the Philippines, a decision that would prove disastrous. The jungle was merciless, typhoons destroying sets, helicopters loaned by the Philippine government suddenly being recalled mid-shoot for actual combat, and the oppressive heat turned every day into a battle. Martin Sheen, pushed to his physical and mental limits, suffered a heart attack at 36. Meanwhile, Marlon Brando arrived on set overweight, unprepared, and unwilling to read the script, forcing Coppola to rewrite Kurtz's entire character on the fly. As the production dragged on, the budget spiraled out of control, ballooning from an estimated $12 million to over $30 million. Coppola, personally financing part of the film, sank deeper into debt and despair. He lost 100 pounds, suffered seizures, and at one point even contemplated suicide. But somehow, against all odds, it worked. Apocalypse Now wasn't just a war movie, it was war. Unraveling into madness on screen and behind the scenes, Coppola's nightmarish vision, blazing skies, and hypnotic sound design, Brando looming in the shadows, created something far beyond a war film. It was a fever dream of violence and insanity. Coppola himself summed it up best: "My film is not a movie. My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam." Act 3. The Conversation, a masterpiece in the shadows. Between The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, Coppola made The Conversation, a film that, in another director's career, might have been their crowning achievement. But here, it was almost an afterthought, overshadowed by the sheer magnitude of his gangster epics.
One surefire rule that I have learned: I don't know anything about human nature. I don't know anything about curiosity. This is my business.
Don't get involved in this, Mr. Go. These tapes are dangerous. Someone may get hurt.
Jaguar Hotel, room 773.
A chilling, paranoid thriller about surveillance, guilt, and the fragility of perception, The Conversation follows Gene Hackman as Harry Call, a professional wiretapper who becomes consumed by a cryptic recording he believes may lead to murder. Compared to Coppola's sprawling crime epics, this was quiet, restrained, but somehow even more unsettling. The film tapped into the post-Watergate paranoia of the era, but its themes feel even more relevant today. In an age of mass surveillance, data leaks, and digital privacy concerns, The Conversation plays like prophecy. Call, once in total control of his world, finds himself unraveling, realizing that the more he listens, the less he understands. Despite winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes, the film was inevitably eclipsed by The Godfather Part 2, released later that same year. At the Oscars, both films were nominated for Best Picture, a rare achievement for a single director, but it was The Godfather Part 2 that took home the prize. Still, The Conversation remains one of Coppola's most disciplined and quietly brilliant works. It proved that he wasn't just a filmmaker of grand spectacle, he could craft something deeply psychological, intricate, and hauntingly intimate. Act 4. Risk and Innovation, Dreams and Disasters. Coppola was never one to play it safe. If the 70s made him a Hollywood titan, the 80s tested just how far he was willing to push his artistic ambitions. He opened the decade with One from the Heart, an audacious experiment in artificiality. Shot entirely on sound stages with bold neon lighting and theatrical sets, it was a visual marvel, but a commercial catastrophe. The film flopped so hard that it bankrupted his independent studio Zoetrope, forcing him to take on more conventional projects just to stay afloat. But Coppola didn't stop taking risks. Rumblefish was his most avant-garde work, a black and white fever dream of teenage alienation, filled with expressionistic cinematography, offbeat performances, and a percussive, jazz-infused score. Critics were divided, but the film's striking aesthetic and existential tone gave it a cult following. In contrast, The Outsiders was a mainstream success. Adapted from S.E. Hinton's novel, the film was a sweeping, earnest, coming-of-age drama that introduced audiences to a new generation of stars. It became a teen classic, proving that Coppola could still connect with audiences even when working on a more conventional scale. Coppola never played by Hollywood's rules. Every film was a reinvention, a new risk. Not every risk paid off, but even his failures were fascinating. Act 5. The Auteur's Struggles, Hollywood and Independence. By the 90s, Coppola's relationship with Hollywood had soured. The new Hollywood era that had once nurtured his artistic ambitions was long gone, replaced by an industry increasingly driven by corporate blockbusters and safe commercial formulas. The grand, auteur-driven filmmaking that had defined his earlier career had become a relic. Coppola found himself caught between artistic passion and financial necessity. He still had moments of brilliance. Bram Stoker's Dracula in '92 was one of his last great mainstream successes, a feverish, visually extravagant take on the classic vampire myth. With its gothic set design, operatic performances, and bold practical effects, it was a film that reveled in excess. It felt like a throwback to an era where Coppola could command massive budgets for deeply personal visions. And it worked. The film was a hit, proving that his cinematic instincts were still sharp. But then came Jack in 1996, a film that felt entirely out of character. A sentimental, family-friendly dramedy starring Robin Williams as a child aging at 4 times the normal rate. Jack was the kind of project that seemed designed to keep Coppola financially afloat rather than push any artistic boundaries. It performed well at the box office but was critically dismissed, proof that even a legendary director wasn't immune to taking on paycheck gigs. By the 2000s, Coppola seemed to stay away from mainstream filmmaking altogether. The man who had once defined Hollywood's golden age of auteurs was now more interested in small, self-funded projects. He focused on personal experimental films like Youth Without Youth in 2007 and Twixt in 2011, works that barely made a ripple in the industry, but reflected his desire to escape Hollywood's commercial pressures. Act 6. Legacy and Influence. The Director's Director. Even as his own filmography became more sporadic, Coppola's influence only grew. The generation he helped define, the auteurs of the 70s, went on to shape modern cinema. Coppola's impact on filmmakers like Scorsese, Spielberg, and Lucas is undeniable, not just in the way they tell stories, but in how they balance artistry and commercial ambition. But beyond just inspiring his peers, Coppola became the director's director, a filmmaker revered not only for his masterpieces, but for his relentless pursuit of artistic integrity. You can see echoes of his influence in everything from Christopher Nolan's narrative complexity to Denis Villeneuve's visual grandeur. Even Coppola's so-called failures have been reassessed. The Godfather Part 3, long considered a misstep, has been reevaluated as an ambitious, if flawed, conclusion to Michael Corleone's saga. One from the Heart, once a financial disaster, is now recognized for its groundbreaking visual experimentation. Time has softened the harshest of criticisms, revealing a director whose misfires were often more interesting than other filmmakers' successes. Coppola's legacy is not just The Godfather or Apocalypse Now. It's about what those films represent. They were made by an artist who believed cinema should be personal, challenging, and fearless. And while Hollywood may have moved on from the auteur era he once thrived in, his impact remains undeniable. Act 7. The Later Years. A Return to Passion. In recent years, Francis Ford Coppola has returned to the kind of grand, ambitious filmmaking that once defined his career. While many of his contemporaries settled into retrospective roles, producing, mentoring, or stepping away from the industry altogether, Coppola remained restless. He never saw himself as a director who was, but as a filmmaker who is, always looking toward the next big idea. For decades, that idea was Megalopolis, a passion project that became something of a Hollywood myth. First conceived in the 1980s, the film was an ambitious, sprawling sci-fi epic that Coppola spent years developing but struggled to get off the ground. Where most filmmakers would have shelved such a project indefinitely, Coppola just refused to let it die. Coppola never stopped chasing his vision. He rejected the studio system decades ago, choosing to finance his work on his own terms, no matter the cost. His story is not over. It's debatable whether Megalopolis is a triumph or another cautionary tale, but one thing is certain, Coppola never stopped believing in cinema, and at 85, he remains exactly what he was in the 70s, an artist willing to risk it all for the sake of the movies. Coppola's career is one of extremes, legendary highs, crushing lows, but always driven by that unrelenting passion for filmmaking. He's more than just the director of The Godfather. He's a visionary, a gambler, and above all, an artist. But that's just our take. What do you think of Francis Ford Coppola? Is he cinema's greatest auteur, or did his later years overshadow his golden era? And which Coppola film left the biggest mark on you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss these cinematic deep dives. This video was made by movie fans, for movie fans.